You referenced in your remarks Vision 2030. This has captured quite a bit of attention for some of the dramatic aspirations that the kingdom has identified for reform, economic, social, other reform inside the kingdom. Without giving the full brief, what's on target and what's not on target in terms of achieving the objectives here?
So broadly, Vision 2030 is on target. Of course, we have all in the global community been challenged by COVID-19. COVID-19 has put an enormous strain economically, socially, in all contexts on governments around the world, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has not been immune from that. So that has affected. So before COVID-19 hit, we were, for instance, on track to record low unemployment among Saudis. That has, of course, now been affected significantly because of the economic impact of COVID-19. But on the positive side, we are among the least affected G20 nations by the downturn caused by the pandemic. So our GDP loss is significantly lower than many of our G20 partners. There are many things that continue to be on track. For instance, home ownership by Saudis is at record highs. Other deliverables such as women's empowerment, women participation in the workforce are ahead of target, for instance. So you have some issues there where we are ahead of target. Quality of life issues are progressing very, very strongly. The larger mega projects, as they are called, of course, will be later to show their results, but they continue to be on target as far as their development processes. And we have been committed to insulating them as much as possible from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic economically. Broadly, Vision 2030 is on track. It is, of course, affected by with the global economic crisis, as I said, and I think once we are over the most severe impacts of the pandemic, we will be able to ramp up very quickly to deliver on the targets that are set. But Vision 2030, by the way, was designed and built to be a flexible vision, in the sense that it should be able to deal very effectively and efficiently with shocks and with surprises. And that's the case. We've been able to reallocate resources as necessary to make sure that those things that are of highest priority are protected and continue to go forward.
And if I could ask, how has the continuing low price of oil affected all this? My assumption is that the short-term needs for spending to enable these reforms are pretty great, but the global economy is not playing along.
As I mentioned, all of our economies, we are a global community, and all of our economies have been affected by this global pandemic. Saudi Arabia has not been immune, and we have, of course, taken a hit. The oil price is not where we're not in an ideal place, but we had enough reserves and we had enough borrowing capacity that we were able to not only keep the most important parts of Vision 20 on track, but also to inject significant stimulus into the domestic economy to make sure that the economy is protected from the worst effects of the pandemic. So Saudi Arabia is still in a very strong financial position, even with all the challenges of the economic downturn and with the downturn in the oil price. We have a lot of resilience built into the system, and we are taking advantage of that now.
The Arab-Israeli peace process, reading between the lines, I've spent too many years focusing on this, reading between the lines of your remarks, you said, I believe, that all these things about progress will follow from a Palestinian-Israeli agreement, which sounded like a reaffirmation of the Arab Peace Initiative, whose basic principle is all Arab and Muslim majority states will make full peace with Israel the day after, essentially, the day after an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, which a model which has been, shall we say, challenged by recent events of the UAE and the Bahrain agreements to have full normal relations with Israel. Now, your government has taken some steps. It has congratulated and welcomed these other countries' moves, permitting overflights between those countries and Israel. Can you imagine more incremental steps down that path as an interim stage before a final peace arrangement? Are there more interim steps like that to be had?
I believe that the focus now needs to be on getting the Palestinians and the Israelis back to the negotiating table. In the end, the only thing that can deliver lasting peace and lasting stability is an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If we don't manage to achieve that, we will continue to have that festering wound in the region. We are committed to the process of peace. Peace, we see, is a strategic necessity for the region. Part of that is an eventual normalization with Israel, as envisioned in the Arab peace plan, as envisioned even in what the kingdom proposed in 1981 in Fez. So we have always envisioned that normalization would happen. But we also need to have a Palestinian state, and we need to have a Palestinian and Israeli peace plan. Therefore, we strongly believe that the focus now should be on getting the Palestinians and the Israelis to the table. And I believe everybody is committed to trying to find a way to achieve that.
And is it your view that the Emiratis and Bahrainis made that more likely or less likely by the steps that they've taken with Israel?
So the Emirati and the Bahraini deal, one of the things they delivered is taking annexation at least off the table for the time being, which was a significant threat to the prospects for peace. So I think that, if you look at it from that context, it does help lay the groundwork for potentially the Israelis and the Palestinians getting back to the table. More work needs to be done, but you can look at it as a positive in that context.
Would you welcome other Arab states, if not Saudi Arabia, taking those sorts of steps, that is, moving toward normal relations with Israel in exchange for Israel taking certain measures with the Palestinians?
The states will have to decide what they think is in the best interest of them and the cause that they believe in.
You had a pretty tough statement about Iran and Iran's regional troublemaking. So I'd like to ask you about U.S. policy toward Iran. In broad strokes, we've had two U.S. policies over the last decade. The Obama administration's focus on nuclear issues, leading to the JCPOA, which you said Saudi Arabia welcomed, which made Iran's other malign activities somewhat of a secondary issue, and which sought a certain balance in regional terms between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And then came the Trump administration's maximum pressure, which saw a toughening of sanctions, but not the achievement of a better deal with Iran. And other than the killing of Qasem Soleimani, itself a significant act, no significant pushback on Iran's malign regional activities, symbolized by the attack on Saudi oil facilities last year, to which there was no direct response. Seems to me perhaps Saudi Arabia isn't pleased with either of these two approaches. Neither one has achieved the sorts of regional stability, has put Iran's nuclear program into on hold, enhanced the security of the region. What do you look for the next administration to do that neither President Trump nor his predecessor succeeded in doing?
So I would argue that the maximum pressure campaign, while it hasn't shown a final result yet, is working. The regime in Iran is less capable in supporting its proxies in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria. It is certainly feeling the pressure domestically. It is certainly constrained and contained more than it was in the past. The problem with the JCPOA, as I think it could be understood from your question, was it didn't address any of the malign activities, whether it's their regional ambition and their support of proxies, their undermining of state institutions, or the more direct threats of their ballistic missile program and other military programs. And our hope is that Iran will accept to sit down with the global community, led by the US. And I know this administration has been willing to sit down with Iran, and we fully support that. Our vision is something like a JCPOA plus, a JCPOA that addresses the deficiencies that the original document had in non-proliferation, mainly the sunset clauses, but also addresses the issue of ballistic missiles and malign regional activities. I mean, under JCPOA, we would have an expiration of the arms embargo this month. This is really, boggles the mind how we came to that conclusion, or we thought that that was reasonable, considering everything that was going on at the time, not least the actions in Syria, the ongoing support for Hezbollah, the ongoing support for the Houthis, and the idea that the Iran would be in such a short time frame getting now access to much more sophisticated weaponry, including equipment that they might use to improve the accuracy of their ballistic missiles, etc., is really dangerous. You mentioned pushback. I think with the US and others are pushing back, we with our support are pushing back very hard. But our belief is we don't want a military confrontation. So we don't want military confrontation between the US and Iran, or between us and Iran. It's Iran that occasionally lashes out militarily and seeks confrontation. We want pressure that leads to talks. And we hope that the Iranians will choose that path rather than leashing out with their military, or with their ballistic missiles, or with their proxies and other activities. I think the path for peace is open. They just need to take it.
And so, is it your view that that the Trump administration has set the table for an aggressive pursuit of, quote, a better deal, JCPOA plus, as the administration laid out to you its strategy to achieve this plus deal?
I think so. I think, as we said, if we continue to put significant pressure on Iran and on the Iranian regime, that will force them eventually to come to the table. And I believe that everybody now sees that without addressing the deficiencies of the original agreement, any future agreement, whether it's called JCPOA, whether it's called something else, will only lay the groundwork for future instability. So it'll be a temporary salve that will not deliver the security that we need and that we all hope for in the region.
The rift between you and Qatar, this has been going on now for 3 years, more than 3 years. What are the specific requirements that your government has to end this? Are they still the 13 demands that were put down 3 years ago? Or is that, shall we say, an opening bargaining position, and cooler heads can prevail and find a solution?
I certainly hope that cooler heads will prevail and find a solution. I believe that we are committed to finding a solution. We are, from the beginning, we've worked with the late Emir of Kuwait to find a path forward. We continue to be willing to engage with our Qatari brothers, and we hope that they are as committed to that engagement. And if we are able to find a path forward to address the legitimate security concerns of the quartet that drove us to take the decisions we took, that will be good news for the region. It will be good news, I think, for stability and security. But we do need to address the legitimate security concerns of the quartet. And I think there is a path towards that, and we are hoping that we can find that in the relatively near future.
When do you think we'll see this Gulf rift resolved?
Your guess is as good as mine.
I hope your guess is better than mine. The second piece of what the vice president said was to raise the concept of a reassessment. This term has a long diplomatic history in the United States. Many Americans, again, not solely Democrats, I think there's some of all political persuasions, have reached the conclusion that perhaps the U.S.-Saudi relationship that has come to develop over the 75 years is untenable in its current terms. How would your government respond to the argument that it needs a reset, a reassessment? And what would be the terms, in your view, that would be appropriate for that sort of reassessment?
So I'm here today and this week to be part of the strategic dialogue between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the thing that I've seen during that dialogue is that the relationship is still very relevant, very strong. The issues of joint interest and cooperation are extensive. They go far beyond the traditional aspects that we think of just counterterrorism. There are many, many more issues where we work together very closely, and we have a strong alignment both in regional policies, but also in our outlook to the global multilateral order. I think that any assessment that is done of the relationship will find that there is still very, very significant value for both countries, and both peoples in the relationship. And I'm confident that any administration will see the very, very strong and important value that is in that relationship. And we will work with any administration to further those interests and work together to deliver all the potential that is in this very important relationship.
So, if you don't mind me asking, why are you starting a strategic dialogue in the 2 weeks before an American election, 3 years after President Trump visited Riyadh?
Well, I mean, the strategic dialogue is an institutional dialogue. It's a dialogue with the United States of America, and therefore I think it should be completely devoid of a political context, and that's the way we see it. We see this relationship as long-lasting. It has lasted for 75 years. It has gone through a lot in those 75 years, but it has continued to deliver strong value. And I think the strategic value, the strategic dialogue we're having today and we had yesterday will show that that value will persist into the future.